Framework Fund. After Claude presents, I will be opening the floor for comments, reactions, and questions from council members. When we finish with the list of speakers, I will suspend the council meeting and allow council members to use a nearby room that we have already prepared for all of you for your proper conversation, dialogues, and discussions. We are prepared. We have prepared the room, and we will stop for lunch 12:30. After lunch, we will reconvene here at 2 p.m. and we will be assessing on where we are with those conversations. If more time is needed for council members, I will immediately after lunch at 2 p.m. will follow with the agenda items that has been presented to you all. I got an informal proposal for you all to bear in mind that according to the timetable, we got 2 agenda items that has to do with enhancing policy coherence through GEF operations, a document that we have presented, and the other has to do with the strategy on knowledge management and learning. I'll be supportive of taking a decision to move these 2 documents for decision for the December council meeting. That with that, it will allow us more time in the agenda of this week to have further conversations within council members. But this is just an informal proposal that I want to put here, and I will be doing some conversations on impressions from council members with regards to these 2 documents. I hope that we will have time to do everything, but I also want, at the same time, I will also want to present ways by which we can generate the proper spaces for dialogue at the council. So that is something that I just want to flag it out. And when we get to that point, 2 p.m., I will bring this to your attention and see the appetite that may be here in order to move those 2 council documents to December if we are not able to see them today or this week, because tomorrow we have IEO, important reports from IEO, important reports from staff, and I don't want to do any major changes of what we have programmed for tomorrow regarding those 2 elements with regards, again, to staff and IEO. So with any further ado, let me pass the floor to Claude Gascon, who will be presenting the programming directions for the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. Claude, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to present the programming directions for the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund agenda item. To remind people of the COP decisions, in this case, what's relevant to the programming directions, I've highlighted the top paragraph. And there was some special language that's shown here regarding the programming directions for this new fund. First and foremost, the GBFF should advance the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework adopted in Montreal at COP15. Secondly, it needs to do this in a complementary fashion to other trust funds, and primarily the GEF 8 Trust Fund Biodiversity Focal Area, as well as the integrated programs, and also scale up financing for biodiversity. And finally, it needs to streamline the access to resources. In order to implement the COP decision, we identified, as we were preparing the programming directions, 3 areas of work to develop this document that you have in front of you. First, we developed 8 action areas that represent the best set of actions to advance the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund in a complementary and scaled up fashion, primarily to the GEF Biodiversity Focal Area and Integrated Program strategies. Second was the question of allocation of resources. we've proposed a model for allocation of resources that is based on a set of common principles that we have derived from the COP decision and that we have heard during the past month in consultations with Council. And thirdly, we present a series of measures that will lead to streamlining the project cycle and easing the access to resources by countries, which was also mandated in the COP decision. As of today, I am confident perhaps that we have reached agreement on 2 of these 3 topics in the programming directions document. I also believe that we have progressed much in many issues related to the allocation of resources, but still many topics remain to be discussed. In the next slides, let me elaborate a little bit on each of these. The 8 action areas strategically complement existing support to the GBF through the GEF Trust Fund, focal area of biodiversity and integrated programs, and also scales up financing to strengthen the national level biodiversity management, planning, policy, governance, and finance approaches needed for robust implementation of the GBF, of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Some of these action areas are new and not included in the GEF Trust Fund, such as Action Area 2, while others require scaling up and increased funding if we are to achieve the goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The GEF project review process is composed of many different components, and each one can represent a potential area of streamlining with different considerations and resulting savings in time and complexity from the agencies and the country's perspective of accessing resources under the new fund. These different components include areas of governance, include areas of project review, include project design and content areas, portal efficiencies, and GEF policies. We presented some detail in the documents. We have understood that there was a desire and an agreement to move forward with this. None of these require any amendments to the GEF instrument. These are all internal policies and guidelines that we can review and present to the new council. And this would be done should a new council be established at the future meetings. Now, in terms of the allocation of resources, what we've done here is try and take a step back to identify some of the principles that I think we have heard to be in agreement from the council members in our discussion. First of all, there's an agreement on having some level of differentiated allocation for countries based on some measure of global biodiversity. There also seems to be an agreement to use the GEF BD star shares as the basis for this differentiation. There's agreement, since this is a voluntary fund, that that would be a first come, first serve basis or a competitive access, that countries would submit proposals, they would be assessed for eligibility and impact, and as they are ready, they would be presented to council, assuming there are resources in the trust fund. There's also agreement on fixing a share for LDCs and SIDS, and in fact, using the GEF 8 Biodiversity Star focal area shares already comes with a built-in 36% share of LDCs and SIDS. That value, of course, can be changed, and that's something that I'll talk about in just a minute. There seems to be agreement on providing some level of incentive to attract philanthropies in the private sector to establish partnerships, some of which you have probably witnessed last night in the event that happened. And there's also an agreement on increasing the share of MDBs and IFIs in the programming of resources. What we feel are still points that need further discussion are, I wouldn't say minor, but I think they are resolvable, hopefully in the next couple of days. First of all, what is the share that should be reserved for LDCs and SIDS? We've heard the minimum and kind of maximum. I think it's up to council now to come to a conclusion on what would be an agreeable share for these countries. Likewise, we have heard that there's agreement on some kind of incentive for philanthropies What we had proposed is that there would be, of the 100% of a new fund capital, there would be 80% going to country allocations and 10% for incentive for philanthropies. Again, those were numbers that obviously were proposed and can be changed depending on the appetite for including or engaging with philanthropies in the private sector. And lastly, there is agreement on increasing the share for MDBs and IFIs. There doesn't seem to be agreement on how to do this. We had proposed, based on our consultation with these agencies, that the best way to assure an increased participation was to reserve resources or create a set-aside pot of money that would be additional to country allocations that countries could go and use, but that would come with increased requirements of co-financing and private sector engagement. Now that again is one proposal. If there are other ways to fold this into the country allocation share, that's fine as well. But right now there doesn't seem to be one agreed upon model of how to do this. Likewise, we had proposed 10% as a target, understanding that that again was just an initial proposal. We've heard that there are desires to increase that fairly significantly, 10, 20, 30, 40, up to 50%. Again, these are decisions that have to be discussed among yourselves and communicated to the GEF Secretariat. What we obviously as a Secretariat have a role to play is not in negotiating any of this. We obviously implement council decisions, but we do have a role to play in making sure that the decisions will be implementable without unintended consequences. And that's something that's very important when we look at creating incentives or not and increasing shares and so forth. We have to be knowledgeable of what this means in terms of the implementation of all of these requirements of an allocation model, and we'll be happy to answer any questions in that respect right now. So I thank you for your time. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Claude. Thanks for your presentation. And with this, I would like to open the floor for the participation of council members. As usual, William will take the list of speakers and will help me with the order of the interventions.
Thank you very much. Sana from the CSO Network, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Very good morning. On behalf of the GEF CSO Network, we welcome this new fund, and we wish that this will be working as a transforming agent to reduce the gap of the biodiversity globally. So we would like to have some few comments. The first is we would like to address some specific regarding the Biodiversity Framework Fund in order to ensure that inclusivity in our decision-making processes. Starting with governance, we would like to see the decision-making role in the GBF fund led by the council meetings. By inviting CSOs to attend the council meetings, we can benefit from their expertise and to ensure more comprehensive and inclusive decision-making processes, and this can be an example. We would like to see the involvement of CSOs in the implementation activities carried out by the GEF agencies. It is critical and crucial to explore mechanisms that enable active participation of CSOs in these processes. By creating avenues for collaboration, we can leverage knowledge and resources of CSOs, fostering a more effective and impactful implementation of the GEF initiatives. We would like to draw attention to need for improving and changing production practices to be more biodiversity positive in agriculture, fisheries, aquaculture, forestry, and the landscape and the seascape scale. Our concern is that this target needs to be more specific and measurable. To address this, we must work together to develop a clearer indicator and monitoring system and allow us to access progress and guide our efforts effectively and transparently. we will also support evaluation and learning opportunities. By addressing these questions and concerns, we can strengthen the effectiveness, impact of the GEF CSO network and the fund and the GEF as a whole. The network would be interested in having service-oriented and capacity-building role. Let's promote collaboration between all levels of society to pave way for a sustainable and biodiverse future. At last, I would like to propose that there should have a regional opportunity for common biodiversity areas, as I mentioned yesterday, like Amazon basin or Mekong basin, so that we can see more opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sano. Let me remind everybody what I said yesterday. Please go just a little bit slower, particularly if you're reading from a script. It becomes very difficult otherwise for the interpreters to follow you. Okay, Gabriela, you have the floor.
Thank you, William, and good morning, colleagues. Not going to make lengthy interventions since probably the time in the room will be essential to resolve these issues. Thanks to the Secretariat for the preparation of the documents and your attempt to strive for compromise. The allocation pattern as it is in the document, in our view, did not capture that very well. But we're very, very interested to work with parties to find a resolution on that. In fact, we feel some of the elements in the document might have been quite confusing to people. The starting point, again, like we mentioned yesterday, is that we want to get as much money on the table as possible to implement the GBF. That's the basic motivation. And it cannot only be ODA. We have to get other money on the table, and we have to find an allocation pattern that allows for that. That's the first principle. And the second one is to ensure that the scarce concessional resources we have go to those who most need them and who have challenges to access resources which are non-concessional. So that's kind of the two basic principles. To crowd in IFIs, so for us it's not just a question of MDBs, I think it's important to reference IFIs in general. DBSA is an implementing agency, there are others. I mean, that's the intention, is to get IFIs on the table. For that, the share of IFIs implementing the projects of the GBF needs to be much higher than 10%, because they are the ones who have the possibility to get this additional money on the table, in our understanding. Happy for other agencies to prove us wrong and also do that. Then there's also I think the confusion in the document is that all the money in the allocation will go to countries, and in our understanding is part of the country allocation. So it's not that there's some side pot that is not for countries. In general, everything is going to countries. But a certain share should be implemented through IFIs, and we're happy to engage with you on that percentage, how much that should be. And it's probably more effective to operate like this than to have a fixed set aside on the side that you get if you do a program with IFIs and then you mingle. It might be much more complicated in the understanding than if we have a clear allocation saying this needs to be implemented through IFIs. And then on the LDCs and SIDS share, our view is that that percentage needs to be significantly higher than what we have in the GEF, in the notion of the understanding that these countries have a much harder time to access funding from other sources than the highly concessional ones. Recognizing that everyone else also has challenges with that. That's why it will never be 100%, but I think we have to take that into account. Then there's also the element of the ceiling, which I think we have to discuss in that closed room. And then there's the element of the co-financing as part of the selection criteria. And lastly, I think it's important to note that there's no star allocation in the pot, because there seems to be confusion about that. The allocation as it is in the document, and we suggested that in the consultations before this council meeting, is that I won't call it a first come, first serve, but the idea is you come forward with projects and they will be assessed across a certain set of criteria, which are in the programming document right now, with the intention to go for the highest possible global biodiversity benefit. high integration across various ministries, as well as private sector and civil society engagement, and the other elements like country-drivenness, that it has to be anchored in an NBSAP and so on. And the projects will be assessed against these criteria, irrespective if they're implemented through an IFI or another implementing agency, right? So that's the idea. The idea is the selection criteria are the same, irrespective of the implementing agency, but we want the IFIs to come into the picture much more significantly in the implementation. And I leave it at that, looking forward to work with you in the room, hoping that we can resolve this, and with the understanding that it also goes along with the package of the other document and the issues which were discussed yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Annette.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. There's not much left to say from seeking on from Gabriela, but let me try, please. As I explained yesterday, the IFI window for us is really an opportunity to scale up, and so it needs to be country allocation in order to actually make the MDBs and IFIs responsible. And we heard stories about them not playing the role they're supposed to be playing in these countries, and maybe because biodiversity is something new for many IFIs and MDBs, and that's fine. But we all know we also have the agenda of greening MDBs and evolution map of MDBs. So for me, really, this is sort of a communicating pipeline. There needs to be some learning from MDBs. There also needs to be some movement from the countries in order to actually make this vehicle a vehicle that actually delivers for the countries. And so I'd also like to hear from the MDBs and IFIs today, this morning, what sort of plans and ideas they have and what opportunities they see. And also I'm making this very, very clear that if they don't deliver, and I see it as a responsibility of MDBs to deliver, if they don't deliver, you will hear from us again in your boards. This is something that's really, really serious, because it's about the whole global architecture of climate finance, and that needs to be moving, and we need to get you engaged, and the countries also need to see you deliver. So that's one thing, and if this doesn't happen, I think we need to think about some sort of rule for reprogramming along the road. So this money sits there, and it's going to be a large share. We'd like it to be a large share in order to actually be transformative. MDBs have the capacity to bring along lots of additional co-financing from the private sector and the public finance. That can only be used if it's a large share. But if it's not used, there needs to be a possibility for reprogramming it. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And there seems to be also a discussion around loans, because in the document there was this, I think it was 80% loans or something. I think we need to scrap that, and because there were lots of worries I heard from countries, and totally justified worries. We're not talking about loans. That needs to be, it's grant financing that comes from the GEF, and it needs to be translated into something the country really wants, either be it TA or blended finance or whatever, needs to fit to the country circumstances. That was something in, and we need to see proposals for crowding in the private sector. Maybe there's also something that the MDBs can explain to us about that, how you envisage that. And on the LDC and SIDS share, yes, we would like it very much to be higher. I would also like to hear the voice from LDCs and SIDS here. So please, Solomon Islands, raise your voice. We'd love to hear you on that. And finally, we have these national steering committees from the GEF in the countries. And we'd really like to use that or see that as a sort of integrated national platform for a strategic dialogue on how to make a strategic plan for the country on biodiversity issues, and invite everyone, invite all the ministries relevant, invite the MDBs, the private sector, etc., to really make this a strategic discussion platform. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annette. I give the floor to Jean. And we're happy that you were able to get here after so many inconveniences with your flights.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Jeanne Akakpo, comme vous le voyez. Je viens du Bénin, mais je représente l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la circonscription de l'Afrique de l'Ouest côtière, la bande côtière. Je remercie beaucoup le gouvernement du Brésil qui a accepté, qui a bien voulu offrir tout le cadre nécessaire pour l'organisation de ce conseil. Et je remercie aussi toute ma reconnaissance au GEF, aux organisateurs, au CIEO, pour cette parfaite organisation de cette session. C'est la première fois que je participe à un tel creuset. Je suis également, je viens également pour la première fois en tant que représentante de ma zone, de ma circonscription à cette session. J'ai juste une préoccupation qui porte. Je suis là évidemment avec ma suppléante, Madame Koné, elle vient de la Côte d'Ivoire. Elle était là hier, comme le disait le président tout à l'heure, j'ai eu tous les problèmes avant de venir. Alors, ma préoccupation par rapport à la discussion en cours, il est fixé un niveau pour les pays les moins avancés et les pays insulaires. Dans ma circonscription, il y a également des pays intermédiaires. Je veux citer évidemment la Côte d'Ivoire, je veux citer le Nigeria et je veux citer le Ghana. Et mon pays, le Bénin, aussi est en voie de devenir pays intermédiaire, à revenu intermédiaire. Alors, quel sera alors leur sort? Parce que la discussion qui est faite tout à l'heure, c'est par rapport globalement au PMA, aux pays insulaires. À l'intérieur de ces deux ensembles, nous avons encore les pays intermédiaires. Quel sera leur sort? C'était juste ma préoccupation. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jean. Et pour continuer en français, je donne la parole à Stéphane.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, effectivement, je vais dire plus ou moins les mêmes choses que Annette et Gabriella, mais je vais le dire en français, donc probablement avec plus de mots et des mots plus longs. Alors, merci beaucoup au secrétariat pour le document et merci aussi à Claude pour la présentation qui est vraiment très claire et très utile. Je crois que c'est vraiment, ça nous aide vraiment en tant que membre du Conseil pour avancer dans la discussion, de bien présenter les principes et les problématiques qu'il nous faut maintenant traiter. Donc si je commence par les points d'accord avec le document, tout d'abord nous soutenons complètement les propositions qui sont faites pour améliorer les procédures d'instruction et d'approbation des projets, notamment le One Step Project Approval. Nous soutenons aussi tout ce qui a été présenté sur les aires d'action. Et je remercie là encore la présentation qui nous a été faite sur le lien entre ces aires d'action et toutes les cibles du cadre de Kunming-Montréal, parce que, encore une fois, si on parle de valeur ajoutée, nous considérons que l'une des valeurs ajoutées de ce nouveau fonds, c'est bien de couvrir l'ensemble du cadre biodiversité de Kunming-Montréal, donc l'ensemble des cibles. Maintenant, si on arrive au sujet le plus compliqué, qui est l'allocation des ressources. Alors encore une fois, on en revient à tout ce qui a été dit hier sur l'architecture internationale et quelle place va prendre ce nouveau fonds dans l'architecture internationale et donc quelle va être sa valeur ajoutée, quels vont être ses avantages comparatifs. Avant de rentrer dans le détail, je voudrais rappeler que pour la France, il y a vraiment un principe cardinal, notre étoile polaire, comme on dit en anglais, qui est d'une part mobiliser autant que possible des ressources supplémentaires pour l'aide au développement et pour les biens publics mondiaux. Et donc ça veut dire faire levier sur les ressources des banques multilatérales et sur les ressources du secteur privé. C'est le premier principe cardinal. Et le deuxième principe cardinal, c'est que les ressources les plus concessionnelles doivent aller en priorité aux pays qui en ont le plus besoin. Et les pays qui en ont le plus besoin, ce sont les PMA et les PEID, clairement. Et donc c'était là aussi, ces deux principes ont complètement irrigué les discussions qui se sont tenues à Paris la semaine dernière dans le cadre du sommet pour le nouveau pacte financier. Maintenant, par rapport à la mise en œuvre de ces principes dans la proposition qui nous est faite, donc là encore une fois, hein, comme Gabriela et Annette avant moi, ça me pose plusieurs problèmes. Le premier, c'est que la part qui est proposée pour les pays, les PMA et les PEID est de 36%, c'est-à-dire l'équivalent de ce qui est aujourd'hui fait par FEM8. Donc pour le dire là encore, comme je l'ai dit hier très clairement, si la part allouée aux pays vulnérables est la même que dans FEM8, il n'y aura pour un pays comme le mien aucune raison de contribuer à ce fonds puisqu'il ne proposera rien de nouveau, rien de différent. La deuxième chose qui nous pose problème, c'est la part allouée au BMD, qui là aussi est trop faible, avec 10%. Et comme pour les pays vulnérables, je voudrais rappeler qu'il ne s'agit pas pour nous d'un caprice ou d'une lubie. Il s'agit encore une fois simplement de mettre en œuvre le cadre de Kwimi-Montréal tel qu'il est. Et sur ces deux aspects, à la fois les pays vulnérables et les BMD, on a un langage très clair dans la stratégie de mobilisation des ressources. Je renvoie les collègues au paragraphe 36 de document L29, qui dit bien clairement demande au FEM d'engager tous les BMD et IFI dans l'élaboration et l'opérationnalisation de ce fonds dans l'objectif de mobiliser des ressources supplémentaires. Et je voudrais quand même indiquer, préciser pour ceux qui n'étaient pas à Montréal, que cet effet de levier sur les BMD a été intégré dans le document, pas à la demande des pays du Nord, mais à la demande insistante de certains pays en développement, notamment la Colombie, qui en faisait une caractéristique fondamentale de ce nouveau fonds, car ils avaient bien compris que les BMD permettraient, par leur effet de levier, de mobiliser davantage de ressources. Maintenant, comment on croise ces deux objectifs, plus pour les pays vulnérables, plus pour les BMD? Là, encore une fois, comme les intervenants précédents, moi, je n'ai pas d'idée préconçue sur le schéma idéal, mais je rejoins complètement Annette sur le fait qu'il faudrait supprimer la mention de 80% de ressources sous forme de prêts pour les BMD, puisque c'était quelque chose qui prête à confusion et qui pourrait mettre en contradiction l'objectif d'augmenter la part pour les BMD et d'augmenter la part pour les pays les plus vulnérables. Voilà, je m'arrête là. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Juliette, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this presentation made. My constituency really looks at this as an opportunity to close the gap, the budget gap that we already have, that we need to boost biodiversity protection conservation. And in that spirit, we would love to engage more on the allocation that has been suggested in the presentation of 36%, considering that there is already a language that other interveners have already talked about, which I think gives specific emphasis on, paying specific, in particular, least developed countries. I think this comes from a background of understanding that they are already the budgets there are really scarce and being allocated to so many other priorities. Biodiversity is a priority, but there is clearly an overstretch of what is available. So if this is given special or particular emphasis, like the language from the COP15 requests us to look at it, that would be very much appreciated. But again, we also understand that it has to be done in a manner that brings forth the spirit of compromise that has always been the case in the GEF Council negotiations or discussions. Regarding the suggested percentage to the private sector, to the philanthropists, I don't think I have a specific percentage that I'm looking at or suggesting, but I just wanted to share that this is actually doable. From GEF 7, our star allocation from the GEF 7, we put it under the sustainable cities, and that was around 7.5 million. And this was a time when the country was trying to develop the informal urban settlements in the capital, Kigali, in Rwanda's capital city. So we saw that, the government is already going for a loan anyway from the World Bank, but it's only looking at the roads, it's only looking at the infrastructure part of it, the gray part of it. So this is when we thought that the GEF star allocation can actually weigh in the resilience component, building the resilience of this infrastructure to floods and by use of nature-based solutions in the city. And this is when we suggested that we could use our star allocation to restore 5 wetlands in the city. So that's quite a bit, and this was actually a message that was easy to understand from different partners, including our own government, the government of, the Ministry of Finance. So we are like, yes, you're going to get a loan, but is this safe? Isn't it risky for where you want to invest? So we are already looking at 185 core funding from the World Bank. Yes, people can claim that this is a loan, but it is in a way subsidized because of what we are pushing in from the GEF funds. But when we started, and this is what I wanted to actually share, when we started, the NDF brought in more resources. It doesn't have to always be loans from the MDBs, it can also be grants. The first NDF portion that we got had a 60-40% loan and grant, but the next one that we got was 10 million and it was all grant. And this means we are starting with something that is very meaningful in the middle of the city, restoring ecosystems that are degraded, and MDBs are being attracted to actually join this journey, which is very meaningful, which is actually also speaking to climate proofing, the loans that we are already getting. So out of all that, we have a portion that is specifically allocated to private sector, only to be accessed by the private sector, again from the NDF, but we also have another component from the PPCR, which is now technical assistance. So this is crowding in resources that we are talking about. It's not documented anywhere, but it's being done. This is coming from the GEF 7 that we are already implementing. And we saw this model that we are discussing here already working. So I just want to encourage us that it can be done. The percentages could be maybe something to think about, but the overall principle really works. And from where I sit as the GEF operational focal point, it's a success story because we are starting with 7, and then we are having all this now coming in, starting with only my part of my star allocation, not even full of my star allocation. So if we can have this innovatively and beautifully accommodated in the GBF fund, that's what would help us from the LDC perspective. And again, we need to continue feeling that we are in the driver's seat. It's all allocated to government. It's not like some is going to different places. As long as all the allocation is given to government, and then we have these modalities beautifully crafted. This is the real deal that we are going to strike if we have to pull resources from wherever they are to come into biodiversity conservation restoration. I thank you, Co-Chair.
And Juliet, can you be so kind and share with the council members what Rwanda is doing with GEF and the GCF altogether?
So I had breakfast with the CEO, that's why. Yeah, so thank you. That now with the GEF 8 that we are developing, the GEF 7 sounded like a program in itself. And so that's where we are coming from to actually look at, you think in terms of a programmatic approach, not a project. Developing a 5-year project is resource consuming in terms of time, in terms of everything. And then before you know it, you are at the midterm review. And before you know it, the project has ended and the achievements are there. They are really beautiful in the intervention area, but the general impact is not at the scale that we want it to be. So that's where we are coming from to say, how about we look at it from a program perspective? If we want to restore a degraded corridor and therefore allow for regeneration of flora, fauna, and then connection of these corridors, let's look at it as a huge template and then make it as integrated as it has to be. Of course, people are the center. We need to enhance people's livelihoods. We're looking at all these bits and pieces coming to enhance the way that people are living. And then we want to have every player involved in this program that is being implemented. So that's when we were like, who are the players in this area that we have? There is GCF, and this one is, just so you know, we feel this one is the sure deal that we have. And then we have other players. Yes, we have the GCF. Also, we are credited to the GCF and for direct access up to the level of 50 million. 50 million sounds big, but it's not so easy to get all the 50 million. And if you got it, where are you going to invest it anyway? So that is where we are now developing a program. It's a degraded ecosystem restoration, building from the success of GEF 4, making it like a platform kind of for all these players to come and get where to fit into. It can be a 10-year program, it could be a 20-year program. After approval of the work program yesterday, this is the phase we are going to jump into with our implementing agency, but some work has already been done at home, consultation of the public and so on. So this is the fashion and design we want to move into. Hopefully we'll have a more schematic of some sort to present to us in Canada at the GEF Assembly, and thereafter hopefully launched in COP28. But it has to be a long-term vision that we are looking at, where all the players that have climate, biodiversity-related resources can get space to intervene. I hope I'm not causing confusion, but that's what we have at the moment. Thank you.
So I think I'm being asked to answer these questions this first round. First, Sano, you had two very important questions. One on the governance, which was discussed yesterday in terms of the inclusivity. I think that's being built into the different elements of the governance of council and the participation of other stakeholders in various formats. So I'm hoping that answers the question. On CSO participation in the fund, obviously, all of the practices and principles of participation in projects that are under the GEF family of funds will apply to this as well. Again, I'm confident that we continue to improve the engagement of all stakeholders, including CSOs, in project design and in project implementation, and so that hopefully will reassure you as well. For most of the other comments, again, thank you for council members for listing what, again, I think is some of the agreed principles. There's perhaps still a little bit more work to be done there. 2 points I think that are important to note across all of these comments. First of all, the 36% share for LDCs and SIDS that was in the document is nothing more than the share that is attributed to these countries under the GEF BD star allocation. Since that was negotiated during GEF 8 with the equivalent aspects of support to these countries, we just felt that that was a starting point for these discussions. Again, the GEF Secretariat is agnostic on what that number is in the end, but that comes kind of grandfathered into the fact that we would use the GEF 8 star, BD star share distribution for countries as the basis for the differentiated allocation. In terms of the other main point, which is the share of MDBs and IFIs and how to get this done, again, I think we have to reflect on those two aspects. It's one thing to say we want to have an increased share of MDBs and IFIs, and we've done that in GEF 8. We can do this here, but I want Council to realize that just simply establishing a target without some tools for the GEF Secretariat to be able to achieve those targets is going to be very difficult. As you know, we are a model that relies on country-driven decisions, on engagement with agencies, on agency selection, and on the use of the resources, whether it's in the GEF Trust Fund, LDCF, and so forth. Increasing the aspiration of shares is one thing, but without tools, and it could be innovative tools, but without tools to allow the GEF Secretariat to reach those aspirations, is going to be very difficult, I think, to do that. So I would urge Council to really think of both aspects of that, the aspiration of what we would want MDB and IFIs to have in terms of a role and a scale, but also the how to get this done. And it's not a simple question, because if, let's just say for the purpose of argument that we establish 50% share for MDBs and IFIs, and that has to be done at the portfolio level, basically that only leaves the GEF with one tool to use, which is once the other 50% is used by other agencies, we are basically forcing every other country to use MDBs and IFIs. So again, it's just a question of the implementation aspects of this, which are the role of the Secretariat to understand, so that we are able to reach the aspirations and the targets and the decisions that Council wants. But I think it's very important to look at the how to actually get those targets established and implemented. And I think that's all I wanted to say here.
Thank you very much, Claude. So next speaker, Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Recognizing a lot of the comments I've got have already been covered by Gabriela, Annette, and Stefan, and we're also breaking out in groups shortly, so I'll hold back until later on. But a couple of key things I wanted to mention. First of all, thank you to the Secretary for the presentation. Support the project simplification of the project cycle. I think that'll make a tremendous contribution. Also wanted to raise the broader point that this is a real opportunity. There's already been comments by Stefan and very eloquently covered off by Juliette just now. This is a real opportunity to do something different with the fund. Being a competitive fund, it creates that opportunity. We know from COP15 that there's a very large gap, and we're not going to be able to deliver on that gap just in direct investment. The solution is going to be catalysing funds from other sources, in particular the MDBs, the IFIs, private sector and philanthropy. So we really need to look at approaches to maximise that and do something different. And I think the approach that's been set out, it's provides a starting point for that discussion. I think it's sort of broadly there, but there's some tinkering with the settings we do need to make, and those have already been covered off. We also need to think about more broadly how we're going to engage with these organisations, and I've already mentioned this a few times, but what's missing is a policy framework for how we're going to manage risk around engagement, particularly with the private sector, but also with the MDBs and IFIs and philanthropy. If we are going to make the most out of this fund, not only do we need to look at the processes, but also how we engage with the organisations, what type of projects, and what type of areas, so we can then catalyse not just upfront, but over the course of time, because that's going to be the comparative advantage of this fund, to do something fundamentally different, and that's what we really need to think about if we are going to deliver the results back to the COP and the GBF, which is the frame in which we should be focusing on. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colin, you have the floor.
Thank you and good morning, all. Just on this particular matter that is before us, for us, first of all, we're talking about means of implementation, and finance is basically lifeblood for actioning and dealing with you know, the continuous loss of biodiversity. For us, we also agree with the broadening of sources of finance. The broadening of it, certainly, you know, the issue relating to preserving the integrity, the credibility of where the finance sources are from. I think that's something that we can work on, but it's important that we get all the resources that we basically need to take action. The differentiation is an important one. I think this is, for us, is important in the sense that it allows us to fully participate in many of these financing mechanisms, the global financing mechanisms, and we've come a long way in terms of looking at the direction GEF 8 has taken, and that is basically a revolution that is slowly happening, and I think we just need to keep building on it. When we look at the small island developing states, and especially from the constituency I come from, we're basically talking more than 20% of the planet's surface, and the diversity that exists within that. I come from a country where it's a very small population, 700,000, speaking 87 different languages. But when you look at the characteristics of the geography, the largest atoll with freshwater lake is also in my country. The largest world lagoon is also in my country. We have sea volcanoes up in the ocean. We are losing islands as well. So for us, this particular matter is really about you know, trying to restore also the land ecosystem, restore also with nature-based solution in terms of not ensuring more of our population leave low-lying islands to high-raised islands by ensuring that we do more on conservation, sustainable use of the environment, which is now fragile, but the solutions are there. I think it is important that we use all these tools that is in front of us to do that. But most importantly, we support this country focus because the diversity that exists even within my constituency is also rich. And this is where probably we don't have a single solution for everyone, but of course there might be some areas in which we have commonalities in, but I think the approach of having a diverse approach is the approach of country focus is important. I just want to finally say that I hope we do not, when we look at the allocations to LDCs and SIDS, well, first of all, for us, we prefer this is grant. Secondly, we would not want to see the allocations go down. So if we, for us, we prefer to see it go up rather than go down. It's just I think those that are on the periphery of some of these biodiversity loss, those are on the front line of climate change, I think needs attention. So we certainly look forward to the discussion going forward, but certainly support the broadening of finance, the country focus, and also the ensuring that LDCs and SIDS have a fixed allocation. I come from a country that is both a SIDS as well as a least developed country, and already we have made submissions to the UN for an extension of our transition graduation. It's just that we cannot afford to graduate due to a number of factors, and I think these sort of things are a little bit more welcoming, and we look forward to ensuring that a decision does take place coming out from this our gathering. With that, I yield back the floor. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Maher.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm not claiming to be an environment specialist, but on the contrary, I could be an engineer for financing. But my original hat is at the ministry is handling the World Bank portfolio. So I know exactly how financing and how sustainable financing is important for countries in achieving their development goals. That's in general. But that definitely going to be mimicked to the environmental benefits and environmental funds. When I heard that the COP asked the GEF to establish a new fund, I firmly believe that it's not a topping up for the STAR allocations for the biodiversity. So the COP wanted us to create some more innovative financing mechanism, probably sustainable as well, to achieve our biodiversity and environmental benefits. My constituency and my country, they firmly believe that these funds should be as a grant basis. On the contrary, and before going that to the other part and the sustainability, having the financial allocations to be distributed over the STAR formula, it's quite not very fair, at least for my constituency and my country. What we would like to see is much more highlight on the country's readiness of receiving these funds, how far they are in implementing the commitments under the biodiversity framework. It's not only about how big your country and how big your GNI is. So that's one part of my intervention. The other part is I tend to remember a similar situation where we are establishing, or we have a gap of financing, and I quote Jordan when back in 2016 during the London conference, what we call London Conference for hosting Syrian refugees. There is a lot of challenges for hosting countries like Jordan and Lebanon, and we have a lot of massive financing needs to cover all the refugees hosting issues. We came up with our development partners, with something what we call concessional financing facility, which became recently a global concessional financing facility because it's now we had Colombia and Ecuador and Moldavia. They have joined that facility recently. That facility means that when Jordan or Lebanon wants to tap into a fund or a loan from the World Bank or European Investment Bank or a number of MDBs, we have an opportunity to make our financing much more concessional, by tapping into the GCFF, the Global Concessional Financing Facility, where donors will be putting some money to make our financing much more concessional, with one condition, that you would need to include number of activities that targets the Syrian refugees in your country. I found that very much at the beginning. We found it like very hard because the governments usually, and at least for my country, we decided not to borrow for any activity related to Syrian refugees. That should be a global public good and everybody should be contributing to that. Yet, we are building schools in Jordan and that's in our national priorities. But if we are allowing Syrian refugees' children to go to schools with Jordanians, when the war is ended, probably, and hopefully Syrians will go back to their countries, they're not going to take their schools with them. So it's a Jordanian asset. I'm sorry I've talked too long of your time, but I just wanted to share my thoughts that now we have a almost similar situation. We have a financing needs, a huge financing needs. And I wanted to make the funds much more sustainable. So I do believe that, yes, grants will be if we have a lot of money, yes, grants will be the financing tool that we are looking for. But with the idea or with the proposal that we have some percentage of the money that will be raised for this fund to be run by the MDBs, and I will call it run by the countries, but through the MDBs. That's a better wording. Yes, if the countries are willing to submit or to do a project for the biodiversity, and they are willing to add these activities from their loan, from their national priorities, from their national commitments. It shouldn't be like only just for the sake of this fund. No, I'm a country and I have some commitments on a national level and international levels. And when I do these, if there's an opportunity, if you want to make your loans much more concessional, is to tap into these funds. So yeah, and if anybody would like to have more information about the GCFF, the Global Concession Financing Facility, they are online, they have a website, but I'm happy to provide more concrete figures on that and how much Jordan at least has leverage from all these funds with the World Bank and the European Investment Bank. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maher. I give the floor now to the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Peoples.
Muchas gracias, buenos días. Siendo la primera ocasión que me dirijo a este espacio, quiero unirme a los saludos y felicitaciones a Brasil y también a la mesa coordinadora por la excelente conducción del escenario. Yo quiero saludarles en nombre del Foro Permanente de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cuestiones Indígenas, que es un órgano asesor de las entidades de la ONU sobre la manera como implementar los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. En abril de este año tuvimos nuestra sesión en Nueva York hablando precisamente de este tema tan importante, salud del planeta y salud territorial, con la presencia de las principales autoridades de la ONU, incluyendo el señor secretario general. Yo quiero mencionar que en nuestro informe hay una recomendación para abordar de manera adecuada, impulsar la participación de los pueblos indígenas en este tipo de escenarios. ¿Y por qué es tan importante esta discusión? Ayer justamente se cumplió 78 años de haberse suscrito la carta que inicia con la expresión "nosotros los pueblos". Sin embargo, en las Naciones Unidas, en los procedimientos, en las instituciones, los pueblos indígenas han quedado atrás y están siendo obligados a permanecer atrás en las tomas de decisiones y en los ejercicios de participación. Y en el caso concreto de la diversidad biológica, que no está separada de la cultura en los pueblos indígenas, pues para los pueblos indígenas es muy importante porque han sido quienes han mantenido la diversidad del planeta, al menos en el 80% de lo que aún queda. Lo que entendemos entonces, y estando de acuerdo con el planteamiento que se hizo en Montreal sobre la necesidad de aumentar la coordinación en el financiamiento, de aumentar los fondos y que estos fondos estén concordados con las metas, específicamente para los pueblos indígenas es muy importante el cumplimiento de la meta 3, pero siendo conscientes de que tenemos una perspectiva distinta. La mayor parte de la diversidad biológica del planeta se ha cuidado sin dinero. No ha sido el dinero el que ha permitido mantener la diversidad del planeta. Ahora, se crea el fondo por unas razones. Se crea el fondo para ayudar a detener la devastación y para ayudar a los actores que están haciendo el cuidado de la diversidad del planeta, con sus conocimientos, con sus formas de gobierno y con una categoría ya reconocida en el sistema internacional de derechos, que son sujetos colectivos. Entonces, en este punto en el que estamos debatiendo, a mí me parece que sí es muy importante tener esta consideración, porque la variable pueblos indígenas puede ser tomada en cuenta para la definición de los recursos y además porque va a contribuir a apoyar el trabajo que ya se viene haciendo desde hace miles de años, y lo que hace el fondo es justamente fortalecer aún más este trabajo que no necesita ser validado por la ciencia occidental, sino que por el contrario necesita dialogar con otras formas de conocimiento. Entonces, para ir yo diciéndoles que por lo menos desde el Foro Permanente de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cuestiones Indígenas ofrecemos nuestra pericia para ayudar en una lectura también técnica sobre la mejor manera de implementar este fondo, por supuesto sin reemplazar la participación que deben tener los pueblos indígenas, pero ayudando siempre a que tengamos soluciones en las que todos seamos beneficiados, porque al final solo tenemos una casa. Esta es nuestra casa común y que queremos ayudar entre todos. Muchas gracias por haberme otorgado el uso de la palabra.
Muchas gracias. I give the floor to René.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Interesting day, and we need to take action in all countries in order to be able to live in harmony with nature by 2050. That's what we all agree on. We feel that the main outstanding issues that draw our attention are, of course, the role of the MDBs in the international financial institutions, the division of the allocation to LDC SITs and countries with high biodiversity benefits, and thirdly, we feel it's very important to ensure future flexibility of the GBFF in order to include future COP decisions. Regarding the programming directions, on the streamlining of the project cycle on paragraph 87, yes, we support the one-step project approval process and also approve the delegation of authority while underlining the importance of the Council's role in the process. On allocation of resources, in essence, we largely support the various elements that are proposed for country allocation in paragraph 61. However, two key elements are important to us. First, co-financing must be one of the selection criteria. This will encourage additional funding. Yesterday, our colleague from Rwanda provided a great and promising example in this regard. Secondly, there needs to be a higher allocation to LDCs and SITs. Why? Well, because, as I said, every country needs to be able to implement the GBF. On the action areas, we feel that action area 3 and 4 should be more central and part of the initial stage. Leveraging finance to implement the GBF should be key. In action area 2, we strongly support IPLC stewardship and governance as well, as acknowledging diverse and intersecting identities and the barriers women and girls face in accessing resources. Moreover, we suggest language to clearly indicate indigenous women playing an active role in the planning and implementation phases of all IPLC projects. Moreover, we support using the term gender transformative throughout the documents, replacing gender responsive. As mentioned before, the private sector engagement and MDB window needs to be stronger. So indeed, let's challenge each other in order to make significant steps in order to fulfill a better implementing ecosystem. I very much look forward to proposals of the GEF and its implementing partners. And of course, subsequently, we must also make sure that our friends at the MDBs and the GEF have the tools to be more effective in obtaining results. Results fitting for this new fund and fitting for GEF aid in general. Thank you, Chair.
So please go ahead, Claude.
Thank you, and thanks again to everybody. There's a lot of similar comments that have come up, and so I won't address the different aspects that need to be debated more in the following session. I think there's a lot of good ideas as well that have been put forth in terms of thinking in novel manners and how to bring in new resources, whether it's the private sector or through blended finance. And so again, I would encourage you to, when you think of the how to use the role of different agencies and primarily MDBs and IFIs, I think that should be a critical step. Renee, you raised the co-financing topic. I'd just like to remind Council that presently in the document, co-financing is encouraged, but we don't have mandatory targets or project-by-project targets. It would be requested and associated with projects that are associated with MDBs and IFIs, which are separate. So again, I want to make that clear. If it's something that Council wants to revisit in terms of the full set of resources in terms of co-financing, but presently the agreement in the document that we thought was, I guess, an agreed upon aspect was that co-financing would be encouraged. Again, I think a lot of needs to be discussed in terms of the different shares and support to the different categories of countries. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me read to you the list of those who have requested the floor. And if I've missed anybody, and I see signs coming up, so if I see anybody else that I've missed, please let me know, and then we close the list. Okay, so the list as I have it is Yoko-san, Darnell, EBRD, ADB, IDB, World Bank, Ramon, Gisela on the Zoom, Laura from Colombia, and Emily. Who have I missed?
Laverne
Laverne.
and Rajender.
Okay. Laverne, Rajender,
And Judy.
Ben. Oh, we're good. We're doing well. Judith. Very good. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Corentin. Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
And Rob. Okay. Right. So that makes an extra 9. Anybody else that I've missed?
Oh, she's there. Yes, she's there.
Yeah, I've got Corentin. I think I've got everybody. All right. So let me read it again, just in case I've missed anybody. Yoko, Darnell, EBRD, ADB, IDB, World Bank, Ramon, Gisela, Laura from Colombia, Emily, Laverne. Can't even understand my own writing. Ramon, Ben, Judith, Corentin, and Rob. Yeah. Okay? Right. Okay, that closes the list. There we go. So, Yoko-san, you have the floor. And of course, Antonella. That's why I couldn't read my writing. Antonella, you're there.
It's okay? Okay, thank you. I would like to support what the previous speakers from the Switzerland and Germany said, and we very much welcome to see the higher floor, higher allocation for the SIDS and LDCs to support their vulnerabilities. But I would like to also share our concern besides the country allocation, but the DSI description in the programming document. There are 2 places that the DSI is mentioned. One is the page 3, para 3 of the footnote 3, it says that the GBF fund will include the placeholder to receive and disperse the revenue generated by the multilateral benefit sharing mechanism established under Decision 15.9 on digital sequence information. This, to us, seems to prejudge the CB, COP decisions going forward, and also and should be deleted. And this another place is the paragraph 47 about the Nagoya Protocol and the Cartagena Protocol. There's also added text in the end of the 47. It says that therefore Action Area 8 will also provide support for the implementation of measures in line with the target 13 and 17, including with respect to digital sequence information on generic resources and the handling of biotechnology. And we also think this is also prejudging the COP decision in the future and should be deleted. And we sent the alternative text to the Secretariat for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yoko-san. So, Darnell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Being the first time I'm taking the floor on behalf of Central Africa constituency, I would like to express our gratitude to Brazil for hosting this meeting. Central Africa constituency reinforced that LDC and small islands development states face a lot of challenge, including many for remote geography. Climate change has a very tangible impact on seeds. The conservation of biodiversity is an important issue as well. Factors like small population size, vulnerability to economic shocks, and fragile land and marine ecosystem make seeds particularly vulnerable to biodiversity losses because they lack of alternatives. The forest of Congo Basin is the second largest tropical rainforest on Earth and serves as the lungs of Africa. It is an incredible, rich, and diverse ecosystem. So, this fund for biodiversity is very critical for the implementation of the new global framework. Today, the challenge is that the mobilization of additional resources dedicated to biodiversity and the putting in place an effective and pragmatic access mechanism to guarantee the access to all developing countries. So we think that the amount shared for the LDC and seed should be increased. We think that 36% is very, very low, so we believe that it should be higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me give the floor now to the EBRD.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'm again here, Alexis, speaking on behalf of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is a very private sector focused MDB, and which is also why we are so keenly interested in the GBFF. Today, maybe taking a step back, we really see this today as a critical moment for us to actually do things differently, do things more creatively, at a higher speed and a higher scale towards supporting more nature financing. If we indeed want to mobilize $200 billion per year by 2030, it's clear we need to mobilize the private sector. And today we need to establish the structure to actually do that effectively. And we see that there's a lot of potential in the GBFF, and want to just outline a couple of points. I want to also emphasize that I know I'm stating the obvious, but we are a counter-cyclical bank, which means we invest where others don't invest. We create markets where there are no markets. And for that, we need the resources of the GBFF, and we need resources from our donors. I wanted also to clarify, when we speak about blended finance, that means that we are essentially combining donor resources, in this case grant resources from the GBFF, with EBRD's own financing, with financing from the private sector, to develop new opportunities for the private sector and to mobilize and create private markets. We're not talking about having new and asking the central government to take on new loans. This is a pure private sector approach, which is blended finance. And again, I'm sorry to be stating maybe the obvious for many of you. When it comes to the use of GBFF resources, there are a range of instruments that we can deploy. That can, of course, be investment grants, where we help the private sector to offset early costs that they have as a new market entrant. So where there are high affordability constraints, we provide a grant to offset those costs. We can also provide incentive grants, which means if a private company fulfills certain milestones, in this case, nature positive investments or behavior, we can reward them with GBFF resources. We can also use GBFF resources in the form of concessional loans, where we provide them with a private company with a loan that is below market terms. There are concessional guarantees, concessional equity. I could go on for a long time, but what I'm trying to say is the resources that we would be mobilizing from the GBFF would be to develop private sector opportunities. And of course, there's also the possibility for us to use GBFF resources for technical assistance, and that is mainly when we have to create an enabling environment for future investments, where we need to work with governments to strengthen the legal frameworks, the policy frameworks, and there are purely technical assistance activities, but that enable us to then create markets where the private sector can come in. Now, nature and biodiversity financing is especially with the private sector, is a frontier area. I think it needs to be clear that this is not something we do on a daily basis, but this is precisely why we need the GBFF. That's why we need the donor resources to actually move the needle and do more than we would be able to do by ourselves. We are currently, as EBRD, developing an approach to nature, which will essentially also summarize how we will implement the MDB's joint statement at COP26 on nature, people, and planet, which essentially affirms our commitment to mainstream nature in our investments and in our operations. So I think you have the commitment from all of us to be mobilizing and doing much more on nature than we have been doing so far, but for that, again, we need the resources of the GBFF. In terms of the programming modalities, as I mentioned before, we need a structure that is conducive to the private sector, that is quick, that is flexible, that is predictable. Otherwise, we will not be able to mobilize the private sector, because the timing and the flexibility we need is much greater than with public sector interventions. At the same time, we of course need to ensure and guarantee that it is based on country ownership, and that is a whole of society approach, as our colleague said yesterday from the CBD. And that is where we, again, would like to suggest, instead of calling it a competitive window, which by name suggests a competition between agencies and countries, rather to foster a joint investment planning country platform approach, where we come together and decide how to best use the scarce GBFF resources. And I want to mention again the example from Rwanda, which was very powerful, and I hope that we can also have breakfast these days, because I want to hear much more about it. I think for us, it is important that we have this upfront strategic discussion on how to use the resources with the government, with the private sector, to have that assurance, that predictability that will allow us to have also to react to the market when opportunities arise. Of course, a 10% window for the MDBs, given the ambition that the fund has, in our perspective, is too low. So we need more support to do what I was trying to explain earlier. We also want to suggest to move away from call for proposal modalities, which again is very much around competition amongst the MDBs. What we need is a possibility, together with the governments, to submit proposals as and when opportunities arrive, particularly with the private sector. I hope that I was able to clarify a little bit. Our colleagues from the other MDBs will come in to provide further clarity, but I hope this was useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexi. I give the floor to the ADB.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the part of ADB, how would we consider using funds from the GBFF? We would be guided by countries on how the GEF funds would be used. We understand very clearly the concern about linking GEF funds to lending operations. As I mentioned yesterday, this doesn't have to be the case. A lot of our GEF grants are processed as pure grants to countries, for example, SIDS and LDC SIDS, but also to some of the more advanced countries. They still receive it as a grant or processed as a technical assistance project. In a few cases, we have them blended with loans, but that's very special, and it's again the choice of the country that borrows. What we would like to do under the GBFF is to increase the capacity of countries to design and implement rigorous and targeted action plans. As my colleague Alexis mentioned, a lot of this would be linked to the work under the MDBs for Nature Forum. We have in ADB a technical assistance, regional technical assistance, that's just starting on promoting nature-positive roadmaps across the region. It's helping countries look at common definitions, taxonomy, metrics, capacity development. What do we mean by nature positive? What do we mean by net nature positive? So we all have to be kind of singing from the same song sheet and trying to achieve the same targets. I mentioned yesterday also we're looking at working directly with countries on greening of the country partnership strategies. And we've experimented with a few countries. The first one was the Philippines. The one ongoing now is Vietnam and Indonesia, where we are, a lot of the time ADB has focused on sector-based infrastructure investments. But what we're trying to do is look at the softer elements of the investment portfolios, including policy support, capacity development, introducing green and blue financing principles to make the downstream investments more sustainable and durable, in line with what we are all trying to achieve here. In terms of action plans, we are planning to work with countries to strengthen their national biodiversity strategic action plans, in particular, the NBSAPs, to make them more implementable. When we've looked at the NBSAPs, we see that a lot of them are quite ambitious. It's a long wish list of actions, but we want to help countries do the financial and economic analysis, the costing. How much is it going to cost you to implement this plan? Look at resource mobilization and financing plans so that they will be able to implement the plan better, and also to help countries originate well-designed projects to achieve their biodiversity targets. And again, based on country choice, we would provide technical assistance and capacity development to help countries have an understanding of the range of tools and instruments available to meet the financing gaps for nature. So this includes training and capacity development for the conduct of natural capital assessments and accounting, a new field, how to create green and blue bonds, how to structure debt for nature swaps, how to structure PPP models to address nature objectives. So what we would propose to do in some of the cases is to integrate GBFF resources with a number of ADB partnership financing facilities. So under a partnership financing facility, there are a number of different targeted trust funds. So we would try and create a range of trust funds that would provide grants to support hubs, accelerators, and other types of structures to create pipelines for both public and private investments, and also support the project preparation that would lead to downstream investments. Some demonstration investments we're already considering with the countries are in the area of nature-based solutions, urban biodiversity. We have a regional flyway initiative, which is looking at wetland restoration. It's not only about the birds, but it's also about developing broader investment plans around the wetlands. Looking at financial innovations, such as risk transfer mechanisms, like insurance for natural capital assets, where we're working in coral reefs under the LDCF and SECF, but also other types of insurance for nature like mangroves, upland forests. This is another new emerging area, and we're working very closely with the insurance industry. So that's an example of the types of things ADB would consider under this particular fund. And I'll leave it at there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me now give the floor to the IDB.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am Gemelina Ramirez, and I am intervening on behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank. Since this is the first time taking the floor, we would like to express our gratitude for this opportunity to express our views and contribute to the discussion. As our colleagues from EBRD, ADB, and AFDB highlighted yesterday, we would like to emphasize that our low participation in the GEF 8 and previous portfolios does not reflect our lack of interest. We have diligently sought out GEF opportunities in the countries we serve. Increasing the involvement of MDBs in channeling GEF resources depends on a multitude of factors, which, as partners, we could address together. The GBFF presents a unique opportunity to start afresh and foster greater participation from IFIs. One of the GBFF objectives is to leverage private capital. To achieve this objective, the participation of IFIs must surpass our current engagement in GEF funds and exceed the 10% currently envisioned. MDBs are best positioned to leverage private capital for high-impact development investments, as has previously been highlighted. We have the capacity to structure financial instruments that address the specific needs of our country counterparts, especially in these times of high fiscal constraints. By catalyzing different partners and funding sources, we can operate at multiple levels within a country to maximize impact. Take, for instance, our recent support to Ecuador, where an IDB guarantee in DFC insurance facilitated a groundbreaking debt for nature conversion, resulting in $323 million of fiscal savings for the conservation of the Galapagos Islands. In biodiversity conservation, project finance and the integration of nature-based solutions into policy and investment decisions are crucial. Our toolkit extends beyond project finance and includes policy-based loans, policy-based guarantees, results-based loans, investment grants, and technical cooperation to mainstream biodiversity in countries' development agendas. Additionally, non-reimbursable resources play a vital role in creating the enabling environment necessary for sustainable investments. This, in addition to the de-risking private sector investments. When collaborating with our partner countries, we work together to strengthen their national capacities, regulatory frameworks, and financial ecosystems to achieve scalability and long-term sustainability. To conclude, 1, we urge the GEF Council, GEF Secretariat, and all members of this partnership to consider the comparative advantages MDBs bring to the table, particularly in policy framework development for biodiversity conservation. And 2, we suggest establishing access criteria with a focus on sector-wide investment strategies and engage multiple stakeholders, fostering collaboration among agencies, and leveraging each one's unique strengths. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Just a kind reminder, if you're reading from a script, go a little slower. Okay. Thank you. Next is the World Bank.
Morning, I'm Angela Armstrong from the World Bank, and we also appreciate this opportunity to intervene this morning. The World Bank also agrees that leverage is key to increase financing for biodiversity and also to address the biodiversity financing gap, which is estimated at $700 billion per year. IFIs can play an important role in deploying GEF resources to mobilize additional funding, including private sector funding. Whether this is through innovative financing like a conservation bond or unlocking MDB concessional and lending resources, in our case, IDA concessional support for LDCs and SIDS or IBRD lending, this would really allow the opportunity to scale up the impact of GBF funding and include support for greater transformation and multi-sectoral approaches. Unlocking IDA and IBRD resources happens when GEF can offer grant financing, which can be critical for maximizing program and project impact, as we've heard cases this morning. Given that much work remains to be done to identify viable business models for private sector investment in nature, we would also encourage the GBF fund set aside to consider a full or much higher grant element, and this would allow a higher risk appetite as well. We also note that currently to qualify for these GBFF set-aside funds, an MDB-led project would be required to meet a 10-to-1 co-financing ratio per project, with at least 80% co-financing from MDB lending resources or private sector partners. We would like to note that this co-financing ratio is much higher than a typical biodiversity focal area project, and we would like to mention that this in fact could limit an MDB's ability to access incentive funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela. So let me give the floor to Claude.
Thank you. Again, I don't want to seem to not recognize many of these comments, but I think many of them don't require my reply, except to thank the agencies for having provided many examples of how this engagement can actually produce results. I think in some cases there are also suggestions on how to make that happen, but again, that's one point of concern. Coming back to a comment from Yoko from Japan, we have noted this, and we will make sure that the final version will have the appropriate edits and be compatible with the establishment document as well with respect to those 2 points. So, thank you.
Thanks, Claude. We still have a few more council members and others in the list of speakers. I just want to do a gentle reminder that the coffee is ready in the other room. I don't want it to get cold. It would be great if we can move fast into that other process. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now let me give the floor to Ramon, followed by Gisela through the Zoom connection.
Gracias, William. Seré muy breve. Estoy de acuerdo con... Espera un momento. Estoy de acuerdo con otros colegas un poco en que estamos cerca de alcanzar un acuerdo. Creo además que la Secretaría ha hecho un buen trabajo en recoger todas las sensibilidades que se expresaron en la última ronda de consultas y solo nos quedaría ajustar algunas cuestiones. La principal característica de este nuevo fondo del Marco Global de Biodiversidad, desde nuestro punto de vista, es que debe diferenciarse de lo que estamos haciendo actualmente. Entonces, deberemos impulsar un volumen importante de recursos, atrayendo al sector privado, a las NDBs, a las IFIs, a la filantropía. Y como decía Alexis, es fundamental acelerar el acceso y que rápidamente esos fondos se puedan implementar. Deliver in time. Creo que algo que comentaste, Claude, es importante, que la Secretaría debe velar por que los objetivos que marquemos, esos porcentajes, que sean factibles, que sean implementables, que no estemos construyendo castillos en el aire. Es importante que si ponemos un porcentaje en determinado grupo de países, en determinado grupo de agencias, que eso sea implementable, que no sea solo una cifra en el aire. Y ahí yo creo que debemos confiar completamente en la Secretaría. También estoy de acuerdo en que el nombre de ventana competitiva quizás no es el más adecuado. Aquí tenemos numerosos English speakers, creo que seguramente podemos encontrar un mejor nombre para esta ventana. Ya tenemos una ventana competitiva en en el GEF 8 y es un enfoque completamente diferente a lo que estamos hablando aquí. Y finalmente, sobre esa ventana, he visto un poco los criterios de esa hasta ahora llamada ventana competitiva y quizás se echarían falta criterios en el sentido de involucración del sector privado, nivel de cofinanciación e incluso cuestiones como la escalabilidad de los proyectos, su replicabilidad. En definitiva, para terminar, simplemente creo que es fundamental que este fondo se diferencie y avancemos en cuestiones sobre lo que hasta a este momento no estamos abordando. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ramón. So, Gisela on the Zoom. Let's see if we can get it connected. There we are. No, we can't hear you.
No.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now yes. Please go ahead, Gisela.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for the work and the presentation, in particular to Claude. This new version of the programming direction is, we see some improvement compared to the previous one. We agree on the 8 action areas on the streamlined one-step project approval process. However, Italy shares the concerns very eloquently expressed by many of my colleagues, in particular Switzerland, Germany, France, and others, about country location, MDB share, and co-financing. And in particular, we would like to see a significant higher share of allocation of concession resources to LDCs and SEEDs. We would like to ensure an adequate resource allocation to the most vulnerable countries without replicating GEF 8 allocation. As for the NDBs, we would like to see even here an allocation higher than 10%. The NDBs, their engagement, cooperation, collaboration, and including co-financing and their capacity to work on blended finance are critical in delivering the mandate and in achieving the objectives of the coming Memorial Global Biodiversity Framework. And Alexis was really very helpful in let us understand what all the NDBs and the BRD and all other NDBs are able to do with the GEF. My last point is it's key that the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund can demonstrate its value added in addressing a specific challenge in the global financial architecture. And like Stefan and Ramon just said, we believe that the main point, the main difference of this fund should be how the fund could have a strong impact and now leverage new resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gisela. Laura, you have the floor from Colombia.
Gracias. We would like to start by commending the Secretariat's work in preparing the document under discussion, which we understand provides a very good basis for us to work on. In reference of resource allocation, we welcome the principles, as we understand that we can use in the GBF fund the same rationale that we already use for star allocation on the GF trust funds, especially for biodiversity focal area. The principles proposed adequately respond to the needs and priorities of developing countries, at the same time reflecting a balanced approach which has been consistently a concern voiced by developing countries, particularly during the informal discussions. Let us stress once again that this fund should serve for all developing countries. The competitive window is a compelling alternative to allocate resources. The point that should prevail is how to respond to the new GBF commitments, generating impact in a short time and with the ambitions that we all are expecting. Regarding the set-aside proposals, we recognize the important role of the MDBs and IFAs play, and thank you for the intervention of the MDBs that they did it. Nothing that they are instrumental for the mobilization of additional resources of finance, but still would require further clarity, in particular to know what would be the differences between the implementing agencies already accredited before the GEF. We echo the Secretariat. Thank you. We echo the Secretariat's comment that including additional set-aside goals without providing the corresponding tools will not be a very good way forward. In order to know if this measure would be effective in increasing IFA's engagement, we would be interested in having first-hand information, for instance, through consultations in which we, as a member of the councils, both developing and developed countries, could participate. Additionally, we understand that the resources to be mobilized from MDBs must be additional to the country allocation, emphasizing that there is still room to improve the current proposal to ensure that this will effectively contribute to leverage resources for bankable projects at a scale that will support the GBF fund. Furthermore, we would like to point out some challenges we face resulting from the limited engagement IFIs have with the Ministry of Environment in some of our countries, since contact is usually with the Ministries of Finance. We also like to see clarification on the proposal for a co-financing rate for blended finance with the MDBs and IFIs. If in GF6 and GF7 the co-financing was up to 18:1, does not seem plausible for the MDBs to operate under a lower rate in the GBF fund. In the same spirit, we will also like to seek further understanding from the Secretariat on the rationale behind the proposal for philanthropy participation, and consequently how it would actually take place, as the incentives and reasons for the effectiveness of the participation of these stakeholders are still blurry due to the limited first-hand information and proposals we have in this regard. Last night we tried to approach some of philanthropies, trying to understand which is the rationale behind that, and they also need to have more spaces to talk about this. Another important point is how we will do the fundraising. We want to see a clear strategy that includes the different approaches to channel resources from all sources. What will be the role of the GEF Secretariat? What will be the role of the GEF implementing agencies? We recognize the importance of scaling up overall finance for the achievement of the Coming Montreal framework. However, the core principle of the GBF fund should be securing availability, predictability, and the additionality of resources for project implementation, especially in mega-diverse countries. Bearing this in mind, we miss the approach of crowding in additional resources and creating incentives for MDBs, philanthropies, and other sources to channel resources through the GBF fund. Scaling the discussion is of paramount importance as the predictability necessary for developing countries to meet their obligation, our obligation, under the Coming Montreal framework, which will come from a robust country allocation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Emily, followed by Laverne.
Thank you, William. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, thank you to the Secretariat. It's not working? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to the Secretariat for preparing the document, to Claude for the presentation. On most part of the programming directions, we are quite happy with what we have on the table. We welcome the focus on IPLC-led stewardship and governance, the 8 action areas, as well as the simplification measures on the project cycles. However, in terms of the allocation of resources, we share the concerns that have been raised by Switzerland, Germany, France, and others. For us, it's important that the GBFF has the necessary resources to deliver on the objectives, and again, ultimately, that funding should come from a variety of sources. With this fund, we have the opportunity to try something differently, to be innovative, and also after hearing the interventions from the different banks, we believe that the increased involvement of MDBs and IFIs can help us in that direction. So therefore, we also support that a certain share should be implemented by MDBs and IFIs. But we also hear you, Claude, on the need for having tools in place to implement this IFI MDB programming targets. And just as a last point, like others, we believe that the shares going to LDCs and SIDS should be significantly higher than what is proposed in the current versions. So thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Laverne, followed by Rajender.
Thank you, William. This is not really prepared, so I think I'll be a lot slow. I wanted to lend support to my colleague from the Solomon Islands as well as my colleague from Rwanda with a few of the elements that they have highlighted, and to give some clarity on certain other recommendations that I've heard. When we say small island developing states and LDCs, I know persons think that we're trying to cordon off funds specifically for us adversely to others. That's not what we're trying to do. We're very, very small and vulnerable. My colleague from the Solomon Islands says his population is 700,000. The population for my country, St. Kitts and Nevis, is 54,000 people. That tells you the size of the country itself. And so it is necessary for us to preserve our biodiversity. The small size does not negate the importance of it and the importance to our survival. In terms of biodiversity achievements, I'm speaking for St. Kitts and Nevis in the capacity as the operational focal point to, over the years, utilizing GEF support in some regards. We have established our Central Forest Reserve and protected area, so you cannot construct anything above our 1,000-foot contour to protect our forest cover. We have our Bastia Valley protected area, which sits on the largest aquifer that we have, which is under threat because we have sea level rise and there's very little rain even at this particular time. So we're doing water rationing. So those are things that we have undertaken. We've also done what is necessary in terms of blending our resources that we receive, particularly from the GEF, where we have a project that we got approved on our GEF 7 in terms of transitioning our energy sector, where the co-financing, one of them that we have used is a loan that we received from the Caribbean Development Bank, a contingent recoverable grant. Well, I said loan because if we are successful with what we're doing, it will turn into a loan of $60 million US. We're exploring our potential for geothermal, and so if the wells prove to be beneficial, the grant turns to a loan. We are also sensitive to the need, as much as we tend to be gun-shy regarding the MDBs, we understand and are sensitive to the fact that we need to bring in additional financing, and so we can deliberate on that a little bit further. We want to emphasize in regards to co-financing, there may be need to consider making this a requirement for MDBs and other entities, because when we're developing our projects, we find that we are the ones who are asked to bring the co-financing to the table. We're not seeing much of that coming from the agencies. And so we go through all of our different projects and different initiatives that we're doing in different places to find the co-financing. In terms of the private sector, I'm not certain what that would mean for us as smaller states, because our private sectors are not huge conglomerates. They are homegrown and very small. They also rely on the state from time to time for support, especially during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. So we're not certain how that will pan out in actuality for us on ground. We also welcome Germany's suggestion of removing the loan element that was represented in the document, and we would also want to see a higher share for the LDCs and SIDS in regards to the resources. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rajender, followed by Ben.
Thank you, William, and thanks, Claude, for the presentation. I also convey my thanks to MDB participants for the clarity they have put on the table today. We welcome the divergent yet rich discussion today on various issues related to the subject, which is very important to all of us. First, I would like to comment on the role of MDBs and IFIs. We need more clarity and more discussion, maybe more open and candid discussion on the subject, especially on the comparative advantage of IFIs and MDBs. And we also need the clarity on the financial resources, how it would be channelized through MDBs, what component would be loan component, what component would be grant component, because there may not be much appetite to conserve biodiversity by taking loans. So we do take note of the knowledge component, the capacity building, and the advantage in creating new financial instruments of the MDBs. However, the exact role, we need more clarity on this before we move further on this. I appreciate the pointers made out by ADB representative on creating the same song sheet and singing from the same song sheet. I think we need to create a better symphony rather than the cacophony of the issues. Second is that let us not lose sight of the fact that the purpose of this entire exercise is to conserve biodiversity, and we should focus on creating scientific based principles for allocation of funds, also channelizing the funds to areas where it is required most, whether it's and not to lose sight of mega biodiverse countries. Whatever we may disagree on the syntax, and we may agree on something else, but we should not lose sight of that fact that it is the fund should go where it is required the most. Also, the countries would require assured concessional and grant financing for this purpose, and that is what the spirit of the CBD conference and the discussion. We welcome co-financing as a concept. However, we need better understanding, and it cannot be made mandatory. I heard someone saying co-financing to be mandatory. Co-financing is a good instrument to channelize the kind of finance required, and it's a welcome step. But at the same time, we should be mindful that it can be co-financing can come based upon the capacity and development stage of a country. It cannot be made mandatory as part of the process. As far as detailed comments on programmatic directions is concerned, we have already submitted to you in writing. I hope that would find place in final version. With these words, back to you.
Thank you very much. Ben, followed by Judith.
Many thanks, William, and many thanks for the rich conversation we've had this morning. Thanks to Claude and the GEF Secretariat to getting us to this place where we are now. I think we had some very helpful consultations on this document ahead of this meeting, and I think those are useful, and I think we're almost there. For example, I think there's broad agreement on the streamlining approach and the action areas as well. I think it's also worth just upfront reiterating from yesterday that we're here to take forward the requests from COP15. There are clear messages in there, including scaling up financing by mobilizing financing from all sources, from public MDBs, private philanthropies. And also it's clear that you need to substantially increase resources, and particularly for LDCs and SIDS. On that front, I think it was really valuable to hear from Juliet from Rwanda on the value, for example, of public-private partnerships. It was also valuable to hear from Solomon Islands, who were humbling, suggesting they wanted to see a slightly increased share rather than down. Central African constituency made the same point. It was really useful to hear from the MDBs on what tools would be useful to help them move forward. And also we've heard the conversations about co-balancing ratios as well, which I think are useful. We'll need to reflect on those going forward. I think it was helpful that Alex EBRD was mentioning about having a more programmatic approach and also looking at maybe a less competitive approach. I think those are things that, I'm not sure if we can build those in now, but certainly going forward for this fund, potentially for GEF 9 as well, we need to start to think about some of those things as well. Going forward, I think it'd be really great to now get into the group discussions and look at some of those issues that we need to address. I think clearly from the discussions so far, I mean, basically we're talking about what sort of percentages we need to focus on for LDCs and SIDS, and we also need to be very clear in terms of the approach to MDBs, what that percentage, whether it's a set aside, in terms of what's going to be helpful to them, as countries, and also to the GEF Secretariat to make sure this is actually operable and we can use the funding which is going into this fund. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So Judith, followed by Corentin.
Voy a hablar en español sobre el ítem que nos compete. El documento, entendemos desde la circunscripción del Cono Sur que el documento de directrices programáticas es la forma en que este fondo va a funcionar, por lo que merece una detallada discusión. Como se ha señalado, hay varias cuestiones que nuestra circunscripción entiende importante resaltar, y ellas son que entendemos importante en la guía los principios cross-cutting que tenemos de implementación. De esta forma hay una señal clara de que todos los países en desarrollo que asumimos las obligaciones bajo el nuevo marco de biodiversidad tendremos la posibilidad de acceder al financiamiento. Estamos de acuerdo en que se tomen en cuenta los shares que ya fueron acordados durante la reposición del GEF 8, y en relación a los incentivos para los bancos en desarrollo multilaterales, nuestra circunscripción entiende que se deben crear otros mecanismos para involucrar a los mismos y a los filántropos, que no impliquen la disminución del acceso a la financiación por parte de los países, que no implique que fondos no puedan ser utilizados en cada ronda o dificultades a la hora de implementación. Finalmente, vemos con buenos ojos lo que se indica como simplificación del ciclo de proyectos, tanto en su modalidad como en su aprobación. Muchas gracias. ¿Yo? Le paso la palabra a Antonella.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, colegas. Bueno, en primer lugar, me gustaría agradecer a la Secretaría por la elaboración de este documento. Sé que fue difícil. En términos generales, apoyamos gran parte de las propuestas, si bien nuevamente debo admitir, ya no es sorpresa a esta altura, ¿no?, que en el párrafo 1 del documento siga sin aparecer el artículo 20 de la Convención sobre Diversidad Biológica. Lo pedimos en 3 documentos, lo pedimos en la sesión informal, lo pusimos en rojo, mayúscula, grande, please include Article 20. Y eso no ocurrió. Vimos que hicieron una contrapropuesta citando una parte del artículo 20, pero que en realidad está citada en el instrumento de gobierno del GEF. Gracias por ese intento, pero no era esa justamente la parte que queríamos que se incluya. Así que para nosotros esto está siendo una concesión muy grande estar aceptando varios puntos de este documento. Así que, por favor, pido que eso también sea tenido en cuenta. No sé. Me gustaría en primer lugar apoyar gran parte de los comentarios realizados por Colombia. ¿En qué sentido? Estamos de acuerdo con los 3 principios que propone el documento, pero principalmente porque creemos que, y además con el índice que se está proponiendo, primero porque es una propuesta mucho más simple de todas las que vinieron anteriormente. Pero lo que me parece más rescatable es que este índice ya fue utilizado en el GEF 8, fue acordado por los donantes hace menos de un año, y la verdad es que principalmente lo más importante es que nos permitiría a todos los países en desarrollo poder cumplir con los compromisos que estuvieron negociando durante más de 3 años bajo la COP de biodiversidad y que finalmente concluyó en la COP 15. Digo esto porque tal vez a veces se percibe como que estamos en veredas enfrentadas y todo lo contrario. Nosotros realmente queremos que todos los países, no solamente un grupo o los que más necesitan, que todos los países realmente podamos cumplir con las obligaciones del GEF a través del GEF Fund. Así que en ese sentido, gracias Laura por haber hecho esas aclaraciones. También queremos, respecto a los MDBs, la participación específica de los MDBs, bueno, obviamente acompañar lo que dijo mi colega Judith. Hay algunas dudas que tenemos sobre cómo en la práctica eso se podría implementar. Gracias, Claude, por tus aclaraciones. El gran problema, por lo menos desde nuestra circunscripción que tenemos, es que no sabemos cómo eso en concreto se puede llegar a aplicar en la práctica, porque hay algunos países que realmente por motivos técnicos no pueden asumir deuda para asociarse con un MDB, porque en el caso de nuestros países generalmente los MDBs no nos dan donaciones, todo lo contrario, nos solicitan tasas de financiamiento muy altas y la verdad que a veces no solo desde un punto de vista técnico, pero sí también político, nosotros no podemos asumir deuda. Entonces, mi consulta es la siguiente: si se incluye un share alto dentro del Country of Allocations, que tenemos que realmente utilizar con los MDBs, por favor, si estoy equivocada, Claude, corregime. Eso significa que si un país desde un punto de vista técnico no puede asumir deuda para poder asociarse, significaría que ese share que queda dentro de nuestro Country Allocations, nosotros no lo vamos a poder usar. Por eso, el tema del MDBs creo que requiere un poquito de mayor claridad para nosotros, para poder entender, porque obviamente que valoramos y consideramos que es importante la participación de ellos, pero bueno, tal vez en las próximas horas podemos tener un poquito más de claridad sobre ese tema, porque realmente está generando mucha confusión y me parece que es claro clarificarlo para ver si podemos encontrar un common ground entre todos. También agradezco a un comentario general que me pareció interesante de España. Bueno, si hablamos de porcentajes, me parece que es importante no hablarlo solo desde el punto de vista de la teoría, sino ver cómo eso se va a aterrizar en la práctica. Así que no solo respecto del allocation que puede haber respecto de los MDBs, pero también incluso si eventualmente la Secretaría del GEF está trabajando con simulaciones, sería bueno que las compartan con nosotros. También respecto a los otros porcentajes que sabemos que se van a discutir, para saber un poquito dónde estamos parados y poder tomar una decisión más consciente. Siempre, obvio, la perspectiva principal para nosotros es que todos los países en desarrollo podamos cumplir con la implementación del GEF. Y por último, bueno, compartimos las mismas preocupaciones que mencionó Laverne respecto de los loans ante los MDBs. También queremos un poquito más de claridad sobre esa cuestión, como mencionaba India. Apoyamos, bueno, el Single Project Modality. Eso fue un tema en que esta circunscripción fue muy vocal en las últimas reuniones del Consejo, de tratar de simplificar un poco el ciclo de proyectos en el GEF. Agradecemos que esto ya se quiera tratar de implementar en el GBF Fund. Gracias, Carlos Manuel. Eso ha sido que nosotros lo hemos pedido mucho. Vemos que esta propuesta va a reducir mucho los plazos y eso es algo importante. Y bueno, por ahora esto es todo. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Corentin, followed by Rob.
Thank you, William. Once again, I would like to recall that we are very grateful to the Secretariat for preparing this document, and we appreciate the clarification on the progress achieved so far presented this morning. Now let me share 3 comments about the programming directions. I will try to be brief. On the share of the LDCs and seats, we definitely believe that the proposed 36% for LDCs and seats is way too low, and we support a significantly bigger share for them. In this sense, we fully share the request of our colleagues from Switzerland, Germany, France, and others. And I really thank our colleagues from Rwanda, Solomon Island, Central Africa, and St. Kitts and Nevis, I think, for the strong intervention on this. Now, on the project cycle simplification, we welcome and support the different options proposed. These seem very relevant, and of course we are interested to see how these could inspire and be applied to the GEF Trust Fund. But actually, we would be interested to have a clarification on this, because if we understood correctly, in case of co-financing of the GBF fund with the GEF, the policies, procedures, and guidelines of the GEF would apply to the GBF fund, unless the GBF fund Council decides otherwise. So we fear that in situations of co-financing from the GBF fund and the GEF resources, the whole efforts, the whole efforts to simplify the project cycle would be lost. So we believe that the options for project cycle simplification of the GBF fund should still apply, even in case of co-financing with the GEF, because we all want, I think, we all want to speed up this process. So I invite you all to consider this proposal. Now on the action areas, I would like to explain a little concern we have. The action areas are supposed to outline how the GBF fund intends to support the different targets of the GBF. And we are actually a bit uncomfortable with the action area 6 in particular, because it's supposed to describe how the GBF fund will support target 7 about the different kinds of pollutions and the target 10. But we noticed that the action area 6 is actually very vague and particularly short compared to the other action areas. Target 7 of the GBF address the reduction of excess nutrient loss, the reduction of risk from pesticides and highly hazardous chemicals, and the reduction of plastic pollution. But none of these 3 critical topics are even mentioned in the action area 6, while the other action area elaborate much more on how they intend to support the related targets. So we request a clear strategy of the GBF fund on the 3 topics related to the target 7. And it's actually the same issue for the target 10 about more substantial sustainable practice in agriculture, fishery, and forestry. Target 10 suggests to increase the application of agroecological practice and other innovative approaches in order to improve resilience and food security. But there is no reference neither to these concepts. So if you could develop and substantiate the action area 6 in this sense, it would be much appreciated. Apart from that, we also fully support a higher share for IFIs and MDBs than what is proposed for the moment. I think the intervention of the representatives of MDBs and regional development banks today were very convincing, so thanks to them. And that's all for the moment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Corentin, Rob, followed by Hongxia.
Thank you so much. And I promise to try to be brief, but I'm also going to really try to read slowly. So I'm not sure those 2 things go together, but I'll try. Again, I would like to express our thanks to the GEF Secretariat for your work on developing and revising the programming directions for the GBF Fund. The document presented to the Council also reflects the rich discussions we've had so far, and we are pleased with how the document has progressed. On resource allocation, we greatly appreciate the GEF's efforts to develop additional resource allocation options and to balance the wide-ranging views on approaches here. We join the many countries that express support, express support for a simpler approach and one that prioritizes funds for countries that need it the most. In our view, resources from the GBF fund should go to developing countries in most need of support to implement the GBF, recognizing that all countries possess important, often unique ecosystems that are critical to nature and people in that area. Resources from the GBF fund should not go to the world's very largest economies or to just those countries with the largest share of biodiversity. We also agree that as contributions will come into the GEF on a rolling basis, it is especially important that the resource allocation framework is simple and practical. For clarity, as Gabriella and other colleagues and our colleague from Jordan pointed out, we do not view the biodiversity star allocation as the basis for the resource allocation approach. So Claude, I think this is one of the issues that we don't think is agreed, contrary to what you included in your presentation in the beginning. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Otherwise, we support many of the GEF's revisions to the resource allocation, which account for multiple differing views, and we're broadly supportive of the proposed resource allocation framework as presented in the Council documents with a couple of changes. Now, the floor for the LDC and SIDS. As I said yesterday, we would support an even greater minimum share allocated to SIDS and LDCs than the current proposal of 36%, such as closer to 50%. With respect to the ceiling and the cap, we prefer the ceiling for countries that are not SIDS or LDCs for the allocations from the fund to be equal to the biodiversity star allocation and cannot support the ceiling as double that allocation. On incentive resources for MDBs, we agree that MDBs need to implement a greater share of projects from the GBF fund. We especially appreciate the example of working with MDBs from our friend from Rwanda. Oops, sorry. We need additional discussion and clarity on the best way to mobilize our resources and partner with MDBs. It is not clear exactly how the proposed set-aside would work as an incentive. We echo the interventions from others that it is important to mobilize more resources through this fund. So any MDB incentive target or window must mobilize more resources. A high co-finance ratio will be important. We also want to clarify, as many others have done, and the MDBs and IFIs in the room have done, and thank you for all of their interventions, they were super helpful, that for projects implemented with MDBs, the funding from the GEF would be grant financing, and we would support encouraging the MDBs to implement a greater share. On streamlining, we support the proposals from the GEF on streamlining the project cycle, including the one-step approval. We look forward to seeing how these changes make a difference and to reviewing what further measures we can take both for the GBF fund and the GEF trust fund. We can support the inclusion of a placeholder in the programming directions for the Council to make adjustments to various elements in this document as the fund progresses. We might want to make changes to resource allocations or engagement with MDBs or the streamlined project cycle as we figure out what works and what doesn't. We recommend including such a placeholder to allow for future changes. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the biodiversity and the star allocation. Global environmental benefits from biodiversity conservation are not generated only when we make investments in the most biodiverse countries, but also when we protect, restore, and conserve unique ecosystems. High benefits could be delivered from protecting unique biodiversity, such as the grasslands in Mongolia, mangrove forests in Bangladesh, the Ovanga Delta in Botswana, forests in Suriname, or the example of SIDS that we heard from the Solomon Islands today. These countries do not already receive the funding that they need to protect and conserve this important biodiversity. These countries would also not receive significant funding from the GBF if it followed the biodiversity star allocation method. We view the GBF fund as a crucial way to expand funding for countries that do not already have access to vast resources and investment. We also understand that a country's capacity is broader than their ability to implement a project successfully. Capacity also includes a country's ability to finance its own biodiversity conservation or to access finance from sources outside the GEF. Megabiodiverse countries often have a higher capacity to access finance for conservation that other countries may not have. I could provide other examples, but I think I'll stop there for now. And I think I think I made my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Hongxia, followed by Baji.
Thank you, Chair. Many thanks for the Secretariat for your tremendous efforts to revising the document and negotiating the positions of different parties. I'd like to share very few points on the eligibility criteria and the country allocation. First, on the eligibility criteria, we support the GBF fund to use the same country allocation on country eligibility criteria already adopted by the CBD COP. That is for sure. On the country allocation, we have been discussing a lot this morning. First, we agree with proposed 3 guiding principles for country allocation and support taking into account the special needs of the Cs and LDCs. Having said that, we also believe it is essential for other developing countries to receive sufficient, equitable, and predictable financial support from the GBF fund. Otherwise, it may discourage their momentum to implement the framework. In this regard, I would urge all the parties, if we're going to say we're not endorsing what we have been negotiated in GEF 8. I mean, like the colleagues mentioned a moment ago, we negotiated that just like 1 year ago. This is nothing new, but this is additional fund. So if you say if we're not saying 36 is not enough, but you're going to limit the twice its share of BD share in the GEF 8. So it seems to me it's a double standard for all the developing countries. That's first point. Second point on the MDBs. We do recognize the important role that any MDB plays in this process to mobilize more resources for developing countries. So we're not objecting that. But I like to echo the points made by colleagues from Colombia, from India, and Argentina, and others. Since we are having a very divergent view on how much we're going to set aside, how is the best way for the MDBs to participate in this process. And when I heard the discussion, when I heard the points made among the EBRD, ADB, and the WBGs, actually there are slightly different views. So in that regard, I would encourage the Secretariat to do further work and further consultation in this process so that we can have a holistic approach to encourage the participation and co-financing from MDBs and IFIs. Lastly, on the incentive method for the philanthropic organizations, I think given the very limited funding resources for this new fund and very limited information for us. Even though I had a discussion with Carlos this morning during breakfast time, he briefed me maybe in GEF 7 or something. We did have like a Blue Economy Alliances working with the philanthropy organization, but I do think maybe we need to draw reference. If everybody agrees the MDB set aside, we maybe have when we draw the references, the experience and the lessons from the similar experience with MDBs, we can go a structured mechanism for philanthropy organization. But at this point of time, we'll not feel comfortable to set a similar mechanism as MDBs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baji, followed by Masood.
Thank you very much, Chair. Also, I would like to join colleagues for thanking the Secretariat for a wonderful work done in terms of developing this GDF document, and also eloquent presentation of the document, and also share some of the concerns raised by members with respect to some of the issues. As I sit here representing 9 countries with a population of around 105 million plus, with a land area of 5.3 million square kilometers, the coming of this fund to support these countries is highly welcome. The consequence constitutes a very diverse challenge with respect to biodiversity, land degradation, and climate change, which are still impacting negatively on the life and livelihood of our people. Therefore, addressing environmental challenges such as climate change, biodiversity losses, land degradation, desertification, particularly in my constituency, requires an integrated holistic approach or holistic strategies involving those sectors with collective responsibility to achieve a common global goal to make this planet Earth a better place for all to thrive. In that regard, the allocation of the 36% of the fund to LCDs and SIDC is highly appreciated and welcome. However, in view of the LCDs and SIDC vulnerability to environmental problem, I would suggest an upward increase of the allocation to LDCs and SIDs respectively, as this region need more of these resources to fund at this point in time to change the dynamics of their environmental problems. As I stated in my previous contribution yesterday, let us look at this, let us as council members critically look at these environmental issues that recognize no geographical boundaries, since we are environmentally linked together. I would like to conclude with a common saying in my little country, the Gambia, that when your neighbor's house is on fire in a windy situation, the best you can do is to help to put the fire. Otherwise, the next victim will be you. The lesson being, let us support each other to make a difference in our various countries to save our planet Earth, to survive irrespective of the size and geographical location. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Baji. I give the floor to Masood.
Thank you very much, and good morning, all colleagues. First of all, I wish to echo the voice of appreciation to the Secretariat for preparing this document on programming directions. I wish to be very specific and limit my comments only on 2 aspects, the country eligibility criteria and also the allocation of resources. Concerning the country eligibility criteria and project eligibility criteria, we agree with the proposed criteria referred to in para 55, that the same country eligibility criteria already adopted by the COP for the operations of the GEF Trust Fund will also be applied to the GBF Fund. Paragraph 56 on the project eligibility criteria, which include alignment with the GBF Fund programming directions and the GF Trust Fund's policies and guidelines, and country-drivenness as expressed in the country's MBSAP priorities is also acceptable and could be supported. With respect to allocation of resources and specifically the principles for this purpose referred to in paragraph 9, we believe that the first principle which suggests allocation system must accommodate financial contributions on a rolling basis does not look to be supportive to the COP decision, which in para 30 has clearly highlighted the importance of the need for predictability and timely flow of funds. And it seems that this first suggested principle does not respond properly to that need. So we appreciate if the Secretariat could clarify on that. On the third suggested principle, which states biodiversity is evenly distributed across the globe, and some areas have greater potential to contribute to global biodiversity benefits and others, we think that this could be a source of ambiguity and concern and necessarily would result in an imbalanced access of all eligible countries to the GBF fund resources and support. Therefore, on the proposed options and elements for building the allocation system, we think that option 1, a small italic I, competitive window, would be the most feasible and acceptable option, since it ensures allocation of a share of GBF fund resources in a country-driven manner to projects and programs of all eligible countries. It could also ensure a fair balance among various regions. Accordingly, we concur with the proposed selection criteria for projects and programs. Having said that, and the third option in a small III, differentiated by diversity allocation, which follows the proposed principle 3, could not capture the interests of all and could trigger an unfair imbalance in allocation and distribution of GBF funds. So in this respect, I wish to reiterate the importance of designing and implementing a project cycle with simple and effective application and transparent submission and approval process, providing easy, efficient, and unhampered access to resources of the GBF fund to all eligible countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker on this first round is Tuan Duc. You have the floor.
Good morning. I represent East Asia constituency. I basically agree with two draft documents, preparing and consolidating by GEF Secretariat. The two draft documents are the results of our collective responsibility so far. I should have a brief comments on the governance of GBF fund. Based on the drafts, we have the council, we may have subsidiary body and advisory group. From my point of view, this is kind of complicated structure, and that complex structure may prolong the process of approval. So I ask GEF Secretariat to consider simplifying this structure to expedite the process of approval. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just before I hand over the mic to the CEO, I just wanted to, again, thank everybody for the comments. I did not come in earlier because, again, a lot of these were just basically statements, but we did hear a little bit more at this point on, from MDBs and from many recipient countries on how to incentivize the increase in shares or the increase in participation in MDBs and IFIs. So I think we did hear some different points of view, and I think that's important to perhaps listen to. But aside from that, I think the remaining points are what we had discussed already, and I think our CEO will kind of summarize this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claude. I think that I want to thank everybody for the different interventions. The room is ready, the coffee is ready. Just let me try to do my best in terms of a summary of what we heard yesterday and what we heard today. With regards to the establishment document that was presented yesterday, financial resources, paragraph 17, remove or revise, that's one. Second, on the reference on benefit sharing, DSI, the same thing, remove or add more. On the subsidiary body, the topic is value, additional value to the decision-making process of the council. And then the terminology with regards to mega biodiverse city and which are the countries that are considered as such. With regards to today, on the programming of the GBF, further caution is needed on resource allocation. So what is the share of LDCs and seeds? That's the first point. The second one has to do what is the target for MDBs and IFIs. The third has to do how to achieve a target for MDB and again IFIs. So the discussion may be around an incentive that allows enforcement of that, aspirational and ideas on the country choices. Then the fourth, what is the target of philanthropies? And the fifth, how to achieve a target for philanthropies. Should it be an incentive that allows the full implementation and enforcement? It is aspirational and dependent on country choices. So with this, I think that I've been able to capture most of what has been discussed here. The room is to your disposition. Also, I want to let you know that if you want to have lunch during the session, we can provide with that, facilitate that. I invited you all to have a lunch with me with regards to the restructuring. We can rearrange that later in this week. So with this, I will conclude the session of this morning, and I will reconvene. Yes, 2 p.m.
2 p.m. And the meeting room is Santa Cruz 2.
And the meeting room is Santa Cruz 2. Thank you so much.
Okay, since we're changing the CEO's lunch for tomorrow, the negotiators can go to Santa Cruz 1, where lunch will be served anyway. So you don't have to move rooms. You go to Santa Cruz 1 and work as long as you want, but your lunch will be served there. Thank you.